I'll say welcome to those that are here. And my name is Ginny Sawyer, work for the City of Fort Collins. This is the second of 3 online budget forums. They will be recorded, so people will be able to look at them later if they're not here now. All right, so we have 2 presenters with us here today. Sana Kendall, our recovery manager, I believe. Titles change, but thank you. And Lawrence Pollock from our budget office. So we're going to be covering a variety of things. Thank you both for being here. If folks do have questions at any time, the Q&A function is open. And so with that, actually, Sana, I'll turn it straight to you.
Thanks, Ginny. I'm going to ask Lawrence to go ahead and share his slides with me. Thank you.
Looks good.
Actually, Lawrence, if you wanted to maybe set kind of the tone and the agenda, that might be good. And then I'm happy to start talking about the American Rescue Plan and the Recovery Plan.
That sounds great, Sana. So for our planned materials for today, we'll be starting with the American Rescue Plan. We also refer to as ARPA, or you may see the acronym ARPA. We're going to talk about some of our budgeting process and some of the financial assumptions that are in that. And then this is, pardon me, this is a mistake. The outcomes that we're going to be reviewing tonight are safe community and transportation and mobilities. Then we're going to open up into a Q&A discussion, and then we'll wrap up with feedback on how you can provide input of your thoughts of what should or should not be included in the budget as we go through the council discussion throughout the next few months. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Sana.
Thanks, Lawrence. So we always want to start here with our COVID timeline and just talk about what has happened in our community and what is continuing to happen in our community. The pandemic is not over, and that's a piece that we want to really kind of stress. When we actually shut down, when you think about March 2020 and the stay-at-home order beginning and the implications that had not only to our businesses but to our community as a whole, that is something we talk quite a bit about. The city of Fort Collins received about $9 million through CARES funding in about late July, August of 2020. And with that, you know, about 30% was focused on the city organization on how do we help our employees through the pandemic, which included such things as telework equipment and personal protective equipment for like our transport bus drivers, right? 40% was then allocated towards helping our community as a whole, so our residents and others address what was happening with the COVID pandemic. And then the other 30% was really to support our businesses and nonprofits survive through the pandemic. In early or late 2020, early 2021, we'd been hearing about the American Rescue Plan and the funding that was going to be coming down through that, and what that might look like and how we might be able to utilize those funds. You know, when we think about the CARES dollars, that $9 million, we're proud of how that went. 70% went directly to our community and the businesses, and how that helped our community survive and work through that process. The one piece that we talk a lot about, though, is if we could have that chance to do it better, it would be around the engagement. So this opportunity to do engagement as we're talking about the American Rescue Plan and what that overall recovery plan will look like is an important one that we wanted to share with this group. And as you know, we're not through the pandemic. The Delta variant is rearing its ugly head right now. And so we are seeing that our ICUs, I think this morning I looked, our ICUs are at 110% capacity. So there are people still being impacted by the pandemic as a whole. Next slide, please, Lawrence. So we are working on a community recovery plan and really wanting to talk about what does that look like and how you might be able to provide feedback in that space. So our vision is Fort Collins residents and businesses are able to participate in a resilient, vibrant, and inclusive future. One of the biggest pieces that we talk about is the healing process that needs to happen. COVID was very traumatic, and you saw within those timeline the implications of that had. So how do we help our community heal? How do we make sure that our whole community is heard through this process? And how do we build a more resilient and vibrant future as we move forward? Our guiding principles around livability, sustainability, and community also help us within our recovery plan. One of the biggest pieces that I will share is that we are working at the regional, at the state, and at the federal level to see how do we leverage all funding that is coming into our community to support our whole community. Next slide, please. So in our recovery plan, you'll see that we're right now in the middle of phase 1, which is engagement with our community. We're working hard. You're seeing us at farmers market, at the Foothills Mall, community opportunities, at CSU's welcome event, and we'll be at Front Range Community College's welcome event next week as well. So we're trying to get out to the community as well as visit and do one-on-ones as well. So please let us know if there's opportunities that we can also support in that space. We will be going to council on October 26th and talking about what we've been hearing from our community and what that might look like as we're developing our full plan. We'll then go back out to the community and say, did we get this right? Did we hear what were the priorities for our whole community in terms of recovery? Before going back to council, we're targeting right now December 7th for a plan adoption, although that date might change just as we're addressing the COVID pandemic right now and the implications it might have on safety of those doing the outreach as well. So we'll be looking at those as we move forward. The meat of the conversation has been around the American Rescue Plan. So ARPA, as Lawrence had shared, this slide is really to show you that the city of Fort Collins has received $28.1 million, but that is not the only funding that has been received into our community. You'll see quite a bit in terms of childcare, utility, water bills. And again, it's not saying we won't be doing work in that space, but how do we leverage those and support that and add value on top of that with the $28.1 million that the city has received. By way of comparison, Larimer County has received about $69 million, specific in that $360 billion bucket. And so we are working with Larimer County and the state on how do we leverage and avoid duplication of funds. Next slide, please. So council at I want to say late May, early June had approved $4.3 million of our $28.1 million allocation, really in terms of the development of the recovery plan, but also to address short and immediate needs. Examples would be emergency needs on personal protective equipment or helping nonprofits and childcare, those aspects. In the budget process that Lawrence is going to be talking about, we also went through that budget process and looked at what are those identified items and opportunities that the American Rescue Plan can fund. And we made that recommendation for about $4 million that would be approved through the city manager's recommended budget. And Lawrence will go into more details on those. But you'll see that bulk of the $28.1 million would be left to be approved in the Fort Collins recovery plan. And so again, the plan for us is what are the community needs, and the American Rescue Plan, the ARPA dollars is that tool to help us achieve that. And you'll see that we have the 23-24 year identified for spending the remaining $19 million in that space. Next slide, please. One of the biggest components that we talk about with the American Rescue Plan, though, is that this must be really tied to COVID and the recovery of the pandemic. This American Rescue Plan is a little different from the CARES funding that communities had received last year, in that it is really rooted in equity. which is really working to serve the most hardest hit communities and families with such things as health, housing, education. Additionally, conversations around behavioral health care services, as well as domestic abuse, drug violence that were not eligible in the CARES funding is now eligible in the American Rescue Plan. And then those same opportunities in addressing the negative economic impact in infrastructure, clean and drinking water, revolving loan funds are eligible projects, as well as broadband for the underrepresented, underserved areas of our community. And then the other last one I would talk about is the revenue loss and the ability to do revenue backfill. And again, that's formula driven replacement and opportunities. And we're looking at that service area by service area versus doing a blanketed sweep of what does revenue loss look like, because we're really looking again at where is that opportunity to help and support our community and the needs that they have. The ineligible, just to share with you, is around pension funds, reserves for the city organization, and paying off debt services or any matching federal dollars that might be opportunities. So those are ineligible with the American Rescue Plan. Next slide, please. So I know that was a lot of information in a quick time frame. So we're saying, how do you get engaged? We would love to have your feedback, whether you have just a few minutes or 10 minutes to respond. ourcity.fcgov.com/4FOCO is an opportunity to share your insight and feedback. And Lawrence is going to do a tutorial of that, so you'll be able to see what that looks like at the end of today's presentation. Here's just some quick hits on some identified areas that our community, your community, has been sharing with us, such as mental health, food insecurity, music and arts, supporting restaurants and affordable housing, and vaccinations. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it back over to Lawrence to talk about the budget process.
Thank you, Sana. All right, so we're gonna talk first about the budgeting process and then some of the financial assumptions that are included in the 2022 recommended budget. So this is a calendar timeline. We typically, in a 2-year budget, we usually do a biennial budget. Due to COVID, we are doing 2 back-to-back 1-year budgets. But a lot of what I'm going to share here was applicable for this year and will be applicable for next year as we are budgeting again, but this time for a 2-year period for the years 2023 and 2024. So in the month of March and April, typically, in the even numbered years, the strategic plan is worked on and finalized with input from our council. In February, we'll have a work session where we discuss all the inputs that we've heard and what the draft strategic plan is for the following 2 years. We get council's input on that, and then we incorporate those changes and modifications, and then go back out so that the strategic plan can become adopted. And then immediately we shift into our budget process. Our budget process, we say, is the intent of it is to resource the strategic plan. And that's why we don't dive into budgeting until after that plan is adopted. The budget requests that we refer to as offers are crafted generally in, they're due at the end of April. And then in the months of May and June, 2 different processes happen in parallel. First, we have what we refer to as BFO teams. Those are teams of staff members for each of our 7 outcomes. And so if you're not familiar with the city's budgeting process, our long-range visioning documents, our strategic plan, our budget, we communicate in these concept of outcomes, which are related, think of it as related programs and services. So transportation and mobility, or safe community. And when you hear those, you can imagine the types of programs and services that are associated with this. And so these outcomes are a way for us to categorize and communicate. So we have one of those, we have a team, a BFO team for each of those 7 outcomes. And they're charged with evaluating all of the budget requests that were submitted to them, negotiating to improve those budget requests based on the amount of money that they have allocated to them. And then they're putting all of those budget requests into a rank order. So if 80 requests were submitted to a team, they're putting all of those into rank. What's the number 1 offer, number 2, number 3, all the way down to number 80. So that's what they're doing in the months of May and June. What they're doing is they're creating that ranking platform, if you will. All 7 of those teams then complete that at the end of June. And that's where we engage our executive leaders, where they look holistically across all 7 of those outcomes, and we'll make the final decisions of what is to be included within the city manager's recommended budget. We go into production in August, and then that document is released in early September. This year, it was released on the 1st of September. And then we enter into a more traditional council process, whereby we'll have a number of work sessions, 2 public hearings prior to the 1st and 2nd reading, with opportunities for the public to have their voice heard as the council takes this recommended budget and turns it into our community's adopted budget. Last year, we had really 3 significant changes based or from COVID. One was that we did not have the BFO teams. And the second was that we could not start our community engagement until I think it was about August, where this year we were able to start in May as we traditionally do. And then the third aspect being that it's a 1-year budget. Well, this year, fortunately, even though there's still unknowns with COVID and significant concerns with the Delta variant, we were able to have our BFO teams engaged and do that work of providing those rankings to our executives. And we were also able to start the public outreach much earlier, like we traditionally do in May. So the main difference this year is that it's just a 1-year budget. Some of the assumptions that are, first, the remaining months that we have ahead of us for our council process. Coming up on the 14th of September, we will be diving into 4 of those outcomes. So culture and recreation, economic health, environmental health, and then lastly, transportation and mobility. So those 4 outcomes will be discussed with our council. And then on the 21st of September, we'll have our first of 2 budget hearings. So those are shown at the top of this chart. Then on the 28th, we'll have our second work session where we're diving into the outcomes, where we'll specifically talk about the budget requests in neighborhood livability and social health, within safe community, and then within our outcome of high performing government. On the 5th of October, we will have our second of 2 public hearings. And then the 12th of October is our last currently scheduled work session, where we will be there'll be general discussion about all budget requests in all 7 of those outcomes that have been discussed in the previous 2 work sessions, and then getting council's final guidance on what they would like to see changed or modified as we bring the budget back for first reading. Though that first reading is scheduled for the 2nd of November, with second reading followed 2 weeks after that. And by law, City Council must adopt the following year's budget by the end of November. So diving into some of the assumptions in the budget, I'm going to start with revenue, because that's one of the foundational pieces. We have to know how much money we're anticipating to collect and or have available in reserves, or think of a savings account, that we can put towards programs and services and their associated costs. Within revenue, one of the primary drivers within governmental funds, or say non-utilities, is sales and use tax. It can be, and both of those can be volatile. You can see about a decade of history here, noticing that the third column from the right was the 2021 budget. You can see that that was coming down lower than 2020. And that's what we went into this year with from a revenue forecast perspective. But fortunately, the economy has done much better than we were concerned that it would. And so that has resulted in some significant increases in revenue beyond what we had budgeted. And that second to last column, you'll see those increases. So in total, sales and use tax going from a budget of 130.8 million to 147.5 million. Really excited about the growth that we've had and the recovery. And with this going into next year for 2022, we're anticipating a more moderate 3% growth off of the increased forecast of 147.5 million. Then flipping that to the other side of the equation, so you've got revenue, then we got the expenses that they're supposed to cover. So here are some of the assumptions that we have in our expenses. General inflation we have at 3%. We know that that's not accurate for any one commodity. Some are higher than that, some are significantly higher than that, and others are lower. But on average, we're using a national average of 3%. We have salary adjustments recommended at 4%. The reason for this is that there were no budgeted salary adjustments for 2021. And so for the city of Fort Collins to stay competitive as an employer, we need to pay at market rates. And in our analysis, many cities along the Front Range actually did do adjustments in 2021. And that is so that we can stay competitive is driving that recommendation of salary adjustments at an average of 4%. Medical costs is something that we've done a very good job of controlling cost on for the past few years. But this year for 2022, we are anticipating a more normal inflationary growth. National average is around 6 to 8%, and we're forecasting about 7.5 for medical. However, on dental costs, we were able to keep that flat at 0% change. We have no changes recommended for our retirement programs. Please note that these are not pension programs. The city used to have a pension program that ended in 1999. Any employees at that time who were registered continued to get that pension, but no new employees after 1999 were eligible for that retirement. And so the ones that you see up there are non-pension retirement programs. We budget staff at 97% of total salary and benefits. The reason for that is because with an organization of over 2,400 employees, we know that there will always be vacancies that we are in the process of hiring for. And so it is not realistic that we would actually ever hit 100% of the targeted staffing costs. And that's why we budgeted at 97%. And then lastly, we knew that because of the $15 million of reductions that were included in the 2021 budget, there would be pressure to restore or reinstate some of those reductions. And so those also will compete with any, say, net new programs or increased level of services that may also be submitted for consideration in the budget. There were a number of themes that came out of the executive team discussions this year. One of those being making strategic investments to future-proof the city. So thinking about the longer term and what are the things that we need to do now so that we can be prepared for those things when they come down the future. Asset management was a very strong theme in many ways this year. It's about taking care of what we've got. That is for facilities and assets around the community, like streets and parks. But it's also the employees who are running these programs and services for the benefit of our community and making sure that we're investing in them. Lots of difficult trade-offs. We, as you can see in the recommended budget, because we show the budget requests that are below the line or not recommended for funding, there's a lot of great ideas there too. The reality is we don't have the resources to fund everything that we need and want. Thus, the difficult trade-offs come in and the benefit of our budgeting process, which is focused on prioritization. The recovery-driven investments from the American Rescue Plan are included. As Sana mentioned, we have $4 million of that recommended for use in 2022. Other themes were addressing the social vulnerabilities in our community, a number of offers towards those, and we'll see some of those coming up. And then intentional efforts to continue building equity into our budgeting processes. We absolutely still have work to do there and are glad that we're making progress in incorporating a very, very important lens from our community into our community's budget. And then lastly, preserving a meaningful and market competitive employee experience. taking care of what we have. As you watching may know, turnover is very expensive. And it costs money to replace staff. And so keeping high caliber, talented, skilled employees is very important. And again, one of the contributors to that, hopefully being the 4% increase in average salaries because there was nothing in 2021. Just quickly, there's a lot of numbers on this chart. I want to focus on two specific areas. So if you look at that middle column, where it's 2022 at the top, we break our expenses that are in the budget into operating, debt, and capital. But I would like to point out the total city appropriations line at $728.3 million. That is a 4% increase over the 2021 budget. But that includes, that amount of money includes a number of expenses that are required by federal accounting standards to be counted twice, or that doubles up a specific expense. And so when we back out those things, like transfers between one fund and another, our internal services, and then some of the other entities that we budget for, we then get down to a net budget of $543 million, and that is a 3.9% increase from 2021. And now we'll dive into our two outcomes for this evening. The first of those being safe community, which we define as Fort Collins provides a safe place to live, work, learn, and play. The funding in this outcome area is $103.9 million, and the various funds or buckets of money, if you will, within the city that contribute to this are listed in the table below. The biggest one I would point you to is the very top one in green, being the general fund. So this is an area of significant investment by the general fund. And most of that you're going to see going into programs and services for fire, police, or municipal court. The next largest contributor is utilities. That 12.1 million is mostly around stormwater. And then there's some level of contribution from natural areas, like for the natural areas rangers that are included in safe community with a small amounts of money in a couple other funds. Those funds go to support a number of what we refer to as ongoing services that are recommended for continuation. So emergency prevention and response, fire, calling 911 and getting police or fire emergency services, what a resident needs, community policing, as well as patrol in the canine unit, our municipal court, stormwater that I mentioned, cybersecurity, protecting the assets of the city and that intellectual property, our natural areas and parks rangers, and then lastly, the West Nile virus program. This budget also includes some additional funding. Part of that, and we see this in every outcome except for high performing government, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. But of the $15 million of reductions that were made for the 2021 budget, about just under 5 million was requested to be restored of that. Again, those restorations for this year's cuts are competing against other potential uses of those funds. Other funding that was added this year specifically for the American, I apologize, this should say the American Rescue Plan or ARPA. And so that's in municipal court for mental health services, addiction and teen diversion services, as well as for a total team of 5 for a mental health response team out of police services. We have a wireless connectivity improvement. That is so that when our officers are in their cars outside of a building where you may have wireless that you think of, but they're out in the community, they still need to be able to be connected to 911. And this is providing better connectivity so they don't drop or miss any communications. The budget also includes the Northwater stormwater improvements, phase 1 of that, and then a continuation of our encampment and cleaning and prevention services. Then shifting to our second outcome of the evening is transportation and mobility that we define by Fort Collins provides a transportation system that moves people and goods safely and efficiently while being accessible, reliable, and convenient. The funding for here, general fund is the largest contributor, followed very closely by the Transportation Fund and Transit Fund. Think of the Transit Fund as operating our transport bus service and dial-a-ride services. So the funding for the this total outcome is just under 70 million. And then you can see that there's a smattering of other funds that contribute smaller amounts of money to this outcome. Ongoing programs and services that are recommended in the budget are for transport, MAX and dial-a-ride, sidewalk and other mobility improvements that the city's actively been working on. Something we refer to as safe routes to everywhere and school crossing guards, street and bridge maintenance. And some of those bridges, we don't have lots of traditional bridges in the city, but bridges can be where the road covers a culvert. We refer to that as a bridge. Those, like our street pavement, need replaced periodically. Snow and ice removal, other road construction and capital projects coming out of our engineering department, our traffic operations, street sweeping, and then lastly, parking services. And then additional funding recommended for 2022. Again, partial restoration of those cuts in 2021. And then ARPA funding for critical and preventative repairs within our parking structures. We're also recommending additional funding for traffic signal timing, the Siphon Bike and Pedestrian Overpass, the Linden Street renovation project, the analysis of opportunities for transport and the Poudre School District to collaborate on transportation needs and potentially reduce costs there. And then lastly, within our Community Capital Improvement Program, we refer to as CCIP. This is a quarter-cent tax dedicated to capital programs. And so the ones that are included for funding based on a predefined schedule that was available and taxpayers voted on this are for bicycle infrastructure, bus stop and pedestrian sidewalk improvements, arterial intersection improvements, and then battery electric buses and related equipment. This is partially funded. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we will open this up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Lawrence. We do not have any questions in the Q&A right now. If anyone on the webinar would like to offer up any questions, we'll keep watching for those as we go. But Lawrence, without, maybe we go ahead and do our city demo.
That sounds great. So I'm going to dive right into that first. Go ahead and share. We have a centralized engagement platform that's online. We refer to it as Our City. And it's meant to be a public engagement platform for numerous projects that we're trying to get feedback input from the community. And at the top, you'll see, you can see, if you're on this webpage, you'll be able to see all active projects. But the top two I want to speak about today are the 2022 budget and the 4 FOCO recovery for the ARPA dollars, or the rescue plan dollars. There's some similarities and differences between these two projects, and that's why we're going to take a quick walkthrough of those. So all you have to do is click on the graphic, and that will take you to the landing page for that project. In this case, this is the 2022 budget. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to go down the left-hand side first. You'll see some welcome information, as well as the question. Do you have 1 minute? Do you have 5 minutes? If you click on the continue reading, there's opportunities for 10 minutes. Do you have more than 20 minutes? Each of those, depending on how much time you have available, you can, if you scroll down on these tabs, there are different types of activities that you can provide, different types of input based on the time that you have to contribute. You can also come back multiple times if you would like to contribute to these pages. And we're really trying to get as many residents as possible to put their thoughts in here, because this is information that we will ultimately share back with the city council as they make changes to the recommended budget for our community's adopted budget. One of the things I'll also point out here is that we have this introductory information in both English and Spanish, depending on your language preferences. And then there will be other information. So these budget forums Once they're recorded, then we will post them online. So for anybody who wants to see the neighborhood livability and social health and environmental health presentation from last week, you click on that recording here. And then we have our budget documents themselves down the side here. On the upper right-hand side, we have our document library. And so we've got our 2022 budget, recommended budget documents. If you notice this folder, that means if you open it, you're going to see other things within that folder. And so we have our traditional, very large budget document that's over 500 pages. It's highly technical, filled with all kinds of numbers. So if that's your thing, this is a great document to read. For those of us who may not be as kind of intent into the number side of everything, and that technical jargon really doesn't mean anything, we have been intentional from feedback from the community to create what we're referring to as a budget in brief. We do this for the adopted budget, and then this year it's the first time we're doing it for the recommended budget. Hopefully to get more residents to have insight on what is being recommended for funding. And the budget in brief document, I would point out, is available both in English and Spanish. There's the engagement toolkit, first top 2 in English and then the next 2 in Spanish. So depending on the type of engagement that you may have time or interest in pursuing. And then other documents, you can link to read all of the narratives of every budget request, whether it was funded or not. Then documents from the 2021 budget, or 2020 strategic plan, and previous budget documents going back to, I think, 2020 or 2011. There are some informational videos here. The way that this software works, you have to hover over to see the name of it. And then we also show the time so that depending on how much time you have available to read or to watch any of those videos. And as much as we can, we're putting those both in English and Spanish. And then to round this out, there's some frequently asked questions as well as key dates that will be coming up. These will be the same dates you'll see later on in this presentation. And then contact information if you'd like. So that is the page for our 2022 budget feedback on our city. And now I'll quickly go into the 4 FOCO. So again, clicking on the graphic.
Hey, Lawrence, we actually have a question.
Yeah.
Can I go to an actual question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And it's somewhat specific, so we'll see if we need to follow up later. But it's in regard to an offer of body worn camera expansion, offer 1822. Looks like it was in the initial budget, but maybe didn't make it to the recommended budget. Do you have any insight into that?
Which specific offer number was that?
18.22.
18.22. Let me just take a quick look. Yes.
Currently digging through a 500-page document.
But I know where to look. So the reason for that offer, which was actually withdrawn, is because there was an interest in accelerating that into 2021 with some of the underspend that we have. And so that offer is moving forward. It's just happening this year instead of in the 2022 budget.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the 4 FOCO project on the Our City page. This, so here's the landing page. You'll notice there is this introductory language, as well as a similar questions about how much time do you have. Notice this is all in English. There is a link up here in Espanol. And if you click on that link, it will turn the entire page to Spanish, not through a Google translation, but better than that. And so depending on your language of choice, you can read the information on the Our City page based on which language preference you choose. So similar to the budget, so how much time you have. So whether that's just sharing one idea, taking a few minutes to take the survey. Again, this depending on how much time you have, is available down on these tabs down here. Think of these are the interactive aspects of this website. And then there's also something I'd like to point out. These are stories of staff, residents, businesses, and how they've been impacted by COVID. And so you can continue reading these. You can provide input on them. And then if I go back to the previous page, you can also you could share your own story if you would like and put that out there. And so for all of these, they're meant to be interactive so people can comment, you can heart things. So then coming back up to the top, as this page is updated or more community events are determined, if you'd like to be notified of those, you can put your email address in here and then click subscribe, and then you will get those email notifications. Related projects, obviously, since ARPA funding is included in the 2022 budget and will also be in the 23-24 budget, we have a link to that. This link here will also change the text on the page to Spanish. Here's the life cycle with the 2 dates for the work session and the regular council meeting that Sana had mentioned in her presentation. Then there is document materials and other resources as well down the side. So just a quick little overview of the resources that we have to collect your engagement. Please, would love for you to take a few minutes and give us your thoughts and mention it with your neighbors, friends, and if you have such an interest of putting together a small group of friends and neighbors, again, those engagement toolkits are available on the Our City site. Before I go back to the presentation, Jenny, are there any additional questions?
There are not any additional questions at this time.
All right. And before I do that, Sana, anything else you would like to mention about the Our City public engagement site?
No, you did a great job. Thank you.
All right, then I'll share a last handful of slides. All right, so we're in this session now of the presentation about how to stay engaged and provide feedback to your council members. That's very intentional language about providing feedback to your council members because the city has already put forward the recommended budget based on various inputs that we've had, the strategic plan, council priorities. And so now is when we are transitioning to our community's budget. The ones who will make those changes are our elected officials. And so we'll be going over some of the ways that you can communicate. First, we have these forums to get information on the recommended budget. I will point out the area highlighted in blue, and that's tomorrow's presentation, which will be on economic health, culture and recreation, and then lastly, high performing government. These are all be recorded, and again, they're available on the Our City page. So 3 primary ways to get your feedback to council members. First, use the Our City, that website that we just demoed here. You can go to ourcity.com for the general landing page. And then if you want to go directly to either the projects that we spoke about, the URLs are listed here as well. Then we have opportunities directly with council. So we have those 2 listening sessions, one on September 21st and the other one on October 5th. And then you can go ahead and participate in those as well as during first and second reading. Of course, at that time, it's kind of input that's later in the game. So earlier input, like from those public hearings, have more of an opportunity for discussion with council as they make those their changes. And then lastly, communicating directly to your council member, whether it's through a listening session. In fact, we have a couple council members who will be having a listening session coming up after the last work session. But the website listed here is on the city's website where you can go and find your council member based on their district. It'll have their contact information. And or you can write, if you just had a general email memo you'd like to write to council, you can also send that to aresgi@scgov.com. We'll be collecting all of that input. And then as part of the materials for city council on the October 12th work session, that last scheduled work session, that's where that information will be summarized for council And so you can see that at that time, if your information, I should say, will be included in that packet of materials if you submit something. We did the Our City demonstration. And so lastly, these are the specific dates that are coming up with council. So the work session coming up next week on the 14th, where we'll be discussing culture and rec, economic health, environmental health, transportation, mobility. Then our first public hearing, the 28th work session for the last 3 outcomes, our second of 2 public hearings on October 5th. That last work session where we'll be discussing just general council direction and public engagement summary from the community. And then in November with first and second reading. And with that, those are our planned materials. I'll stop sharing and see what other questions that we have.
All right, thank you again, Lawrence and Sana. No additional questions at this time. I would thank those of you who are dedicated to our public process. We really do appreciate it. As you're engaging with friends and family in the community, I think I would point people first and foremost to that budget in brief. It's a great high-level overview, really talking about the gist of where our money comes from, where it goes, and what our priorities are. And those are the big key hits that we want to make sure we are on track with the community. So that would be.
And I forgot to, thanks for mentioning that, Jenny. Yeah, those budget and briefs compared to the 500-page big document that we always do. Those are 24-page documents, including the covers. And they've been written to be intentionally more accessible to much broader population in our community.
Yes. And same on these recovery dollars. This is a really unique opportunity for our community right now. And so I was impressed. There's going to be a wide variety of where we can spend this money. So once again, like to meet community needs with that. So again, these webinars will be and are being recorded and posted online. We have one more tomorrow evening, 5:30 to 6:30. Which outcome areas will we cover there, Lawrence?
That's going to be culture and recreation. Let me get there. Economic health, culture and recreation, and high performing government.
Okay, so please join again if you're able, and if not, again, you can view it later on the Our City website. So with no other questions, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching.